Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 8 of our Wilson Institute Speaker Series, Self-Isolation Edition. I hope you're all well. A few updates. This will be our last episode for the next little while. I'm going on a well-deserved vacation after today. Okay, vacation, maybe overstating it. I'll stay at home in Hamilton, I'll fill up my kids' pool, and I will sit in 6 inches of water for the next 14 days. It will be glorious. And when I get back, we'll be hard at work on our fall speaker series on racism and democracy. Check out our website and social media for more details. It's my pleasure today to catch up with Jennifer Bonnell, someone I've known for years since our time at the Wilson Institute. Jen is currently a professor of history at York University, and in 2013-2015, she was a visiting assistant professor here at the Wilson Institute. It was great to catch up with Jen and talk about her important and incredibly relevant research. And now, without further ado, let's go. Jen, how's it going? It's been forever.
Good. It's nice to see you, Max.
How are things?
Good, busy, and lots of writing on the go.
I enjoy your background. I see you're enjoying some fresh air on a warm day like today.
I like to sit perched on this cliffside while while I work. It's
Just be careful. It seems like you're pretty close to the edge.
I'm really far from the ocean where I'm actually sitting, so I like to remind myself of places I'm from and where I'd like to return to when all of this is over.
Well, thanks for coming here. It's great to see you again. It's like I said, it's been a while, and it's always fun to catch up with you. So before we get, first things first. So how about you tell us a little bit about for our viewers who may not know you as much as I do. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and about your research?
Sure. I describe myself as a historian of environmental change in Canada, focusing particularly on the Great Lakes region, so crossing national boundaries there to look at not only environmental change in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, 1880s to 1940s tends to be where I dwell, but also memory. I'm really interested in questions of memory and how people have experience both changing landscapes and the species that depend upon those landscapes, how human memory really factors into how we have both experienced and understood those changes over time. So for those of you who aren't aware of my work, I wrote a history of Toronto's Don River Valley that was published in 2014 at the University of Toronto Press. And I've done quite a bit of work with historical GIS too. There was a big mapping component that was tied to that, effort to understand that history of change in a watershed over time, being able to mine the fire insurance records for the industrial development over time and look to broader watershed changes. Collaborating with GIS technicians and map librarians really helped to bring that project into greater comprehension for me as a historian, and resulted in a lot of really interesting connections with artists and map makers and others. So that mapping project really had a life of its own and turned into a collection on working with historical GIS.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm now pursuing a number of related projects on environmental change and wildlife, I would say, and agricultural change in the region.
I should add that your book on the Don River is an award-winning book on the Don River.
Yes, an important, qualifier. It's really nice. It's just amazing. I'm constantly amazed by, the life that a book continues to have after you release it. And, I've been really fortunate to have a pretty wide readership, not just academics, but a lot of people who are just interested in, the history of Toronto and its environment. So I love that book has just started a lot of conversations in different parts of society. It's been great.
And as we all know, climate change is one of the most pressing, maybe the most pressing issue that faces humanity right now. And so what kind of insight do you think history and environmental historians can bring to the conversation about climate change, say, as opposed to STEM-based researchers?
Well, I think one thing that environmental historians do really well is consider the longue durée, consider much wider timeframes when they look to histories of change over time. So mining historical records of weather and human experience, for example, um, can really provide nuance to those, scientific studies of similar trends, and show, for example, like the depth of climatic variation, everything from, the medieval warming period to the little ice age that followed from the 1300s to the 1800s. So understanding that we've been, that this isn't new on the one hand, but then on the other hand, providing the context that helps us understand that although climatic variation might not be new, these changes that we're currently facing are just exponentially different, that we're looking, at what John McNeill has called the great acceleration in the post-war period, where we're just seeing these existing trends really accelerate and be, exacerbated by different factors. I think the dominant message that this hits home for me as an environmental historian, and for those of us who are thinking ecologically, I suppose, is everything is interconnected. And if ecologists have been saying that for 100 years, it never fails to ring true. And I think when I think back on my research on the Don River and what early settlement changes in terms of deforestation and just the plowing of land, what that meant for disease environments in the late 1700s. Settlement brought created the conditions for disease, in that many settlers complained of symptoms that they called lake fever in the summer, but it was actually malaria, and it was caused by, northern extension of the range of the Anopheles mosquito, and things as subtle as, a horse's hoof print in the mud, creating the right stagnant water conditions for mosquitoes to breed in. But it was human development that created those disease conditions. And I think the pandemic and the pandemics that will inevitably follow this one are the result of similar kinds of interactions, where development creates contact zones, I guess, for lack of a better word, between humans and species. It creates new and novel species interactions that can lead to this kind of disease transmission. So I think thinking about it as the creation of diseased environments and this is something that environmental historians are signaling that we return to, is looking beyond a really rigid germ theory of disease to understand that 19th century settlers were kind of onto something when they talked about porous bodies and certain places or environments as being perhaps more diseased than others. We tend to scoff at these kind of approaches to disease and think that they were so wrong-headed. But there's something to be learned there, as Linda Nash and others have shown us, that our bodies are connected to environments, and there's are porous to disease circumstances that we often create in those environments. So, yeah.
So I've always been a big fan of your work, and if I remember correctly, when we were both at the institute together, you had started working on some really great project on bees and Ontario, right? Can you tell us a little bit more about this project?
Yeah, sure. I'm so enamored with this project, actually. I finally had the opportunity to turn to it with greater time in the last year, I'd say, after really focusing on teaching for a number of years, both at Mac, as you know,
yeah,
Max, and in my early years at York, where I just had to throw a lot of energy into teaching and program development. So the last year and a half, I've been really diving back into the bee project and so enjoying it. So I'll tell you, it's a project that is looking again at beekeepers and environmental change in the Great Lakes region. So I'm interested both in Southern Ontario and surrounding neighboring Great Lakes states, New York, Michigan, Illinois, and a few others that were kind of the heartland of 19th century agriculture and beekeeping. So, there was a sort of golden age of beekeeping in this region that sort of shifts west after the 1920s, when California and Western provinces really, out Central Canadian and American counterparts. But I guess the soundbite for this project is really how beekeepers were very early advocates for environmental protection, and in a way that has been really overlooked. They kept remarkable records. So at the University of Guelph, we have all of the annual reports of the Ontario Beekeeping Association, which formed in 1880. It's one of Canada's oldest agricultural associations. And they wrote everything down. I just love these guys. So what I've found in my explorations, both of beekeepers in Ontario and their counterparts in Michigan and Ohio and these other nearby states, first of all, they were in regular communication with each other. There was a real transnational conversation around concerns that beekeepers were increasingly having from the 1880s on. And one of the biggest ones was responses to early insecticide use. So orchardists and growers from the 1880s on, as they're beginning to intensify their productions and simplify ecosystems, insect populations are responding. So you get just a real crescendo of insect pest activity. And it's not, it didn't start out that way. This is something that we really noticed with increased monoculture development, increased intensification. So with growing insecticide use, beekeepers find themselves in the position of not only trying to negotiate with their neighbors because they're facing honeybee die-offs, but also having to educate them about the value of honeybees in pollination. So this is one of the big findings, is that even as late as the 1870s, when this is scientifically understood, the value of honeybees in pollination, it's just not that broadly understood. So a lot of growers are still understanding bees as a pest to the orchard rather than an aid. So beekeepers advocate there, but also in a number of other areas, trying to protect diverse sources of what they call bee forage or bee pasture, which is essentially wildflowers. And how changes in agriculture are meaning we've got less diversity of forage sources for bees, which means lower nutrition, which means lower resilience. And they're just, because they had to be so environmentally aware, and by that I mean, they wouldn't call themselves environmentalists, but because for their economic interests, they had to know what was coming into bloom when, how weather conditions affected the bloom and the health of their bees. They were acutely aware of changes at the local level. And because of this, they emerge as really interesting and early advocates for diverse ecosystems to support their honeybees. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell why you're enamored with it. It sounds so interesting. And I mean, I remember when you talked to us about that project back in the day at a Wilson lunch, and it just, yeah, I've always been really, really intrigued by this project, and really curious as to where, like you were going with it. And so, which leads to my next question. So are there any articles, chapters, books, or even online publications that we can read if either myself or anyone who's watching us to basically learn a little bit more about your work on bees?
Yeah, certainly. I've just been churning stuff out lately, actually. So I have a piece that's forthcoming in Environmental History, which I'm really thrilled about. It'll be coming out in January 2021. And that's on the insecticide story. That's looking at, early insecticide controversies. We typically think of insecticide controversies as a post-war phenomenon. This is looking to the 1880s and 90s and beekeepers' role in trying to bring this to public attention. It's coming out in January, but an electronic copy will be available sometime this fall for circulation. So I'll put that up on my website.
Nice.
The Honeybee Project will also, I'm in the process of turning it into a book for publication with McGill Queens. And I'm hoping to have a draft of that completed by next time, this time next year. I have Sean Courage and I are co-editing a collection called Traces of the Animal Past, Methodological Challenges in Animal History. And I have a chapter on honeybees, like thinking about honeybee labor as an interpretive device in animal history. So really taking that idea, beekeepers talk about honeybee workers. These are worker bees, right? That work for the larger organism of the hive. How do we think about labor as a kind of prism to understand and think about the changing working conditions of bees? So it's called Occupational Hazards, and that chapter will be coming out in that collection. I had so much fun writing that. And yeah, on the Bee Project, there's one other piece coming out with Ontario history, actually, looking to just the Ontario sources and players surrounding this story of insecticide controversies. That's coming out in a special issue on Ontario environmental history this fall. So yeah, it's the soonest. Yeah.
But do you have any projects that we can look forward to in the near future?
Yeah, somehow I decided to do them all at once. So I am doing way too many things in many different directions right now. But one of them is I was actually contracted by the BC government to write a history of wildlife management in the province, and essentially to write them a book, which is kind of unusual. I used to, back in my past life, I used to do hawk research, like for forest hawks for the Ministry of Environment, tromping through the undergrowth looking for endangered species of birds. And those connections from 25 years ago, that biologist I worked for is now the assistant deputy minister of the Ministry of Forests. And so we hadn't seen each other in years, and he heard what I do, and he's about to retire. And anyway, so I ended up last summer I did 75 interviews with hunters and retired biologists and Indigenous leaders and conservationists, and you name it, anyone who has some connection with wildlife, as well as, citizen scientists and naturalists. It was just fantastic all over the province. Mm-hmm. A lot like this, Max, a lot over Zoom, but I was able to travel as well. And I'm so thankful that the project wasn't scheduled for this year. And I'm now in the midst of really moving through the masses of material I gathered, both, the history of this, works like Tina Liu and George Colpitts, who've written a lot about this, trying to work with that as well as my primary sources and all of these interviews, who they're looking for something that's pre-contact to the present. So my interviews only come in, the memory only slips back to the 40s. Like I did interview some 96-year-old moose biologist, but I'm writing based on something I've never done before, which is working with mostly secondary sources for the first, number of chapters. So that's a big project. The Bee Project is ongoing. I've really worked up the insecticide piece, but I'm working on a piece on honeybee diseases and another on honeybee forage sources and how much those changed wildflowers. And then I have a collaborative project with a couple of historians at York, Al Corbiere and Victoria Freeman. We're working on a multi-year project with Black Creek Pioneer Village to bring Indigenous history to the village. So it's in collaboration with senior staff at Black Creek, with a really wonderful theater company called Jumblies Theater in Toronto, which does really community-driven interactive programming. So Black Creek has designated a building for this new exhibit space on, settler Indigenous connections. This is Victoria Freeman's wheelhouse. She really works on these issues. And now we have a new hire at York, Alan Corbiere, who's an Anishinaabe historian. We're so thrilled to have him on our team. And I'm bringing the public history component to help shape this project. So that'll be over the next couple of years and resulting in an exhibition. And then I kind of want to go back to a river, and I'm thinking I might return to the Cowichan River where I grew up. A lot of the interviews I did with wildlife biologists last summer were pointing to the urgency of the situation on the Cowichan, which is nothing like the Don. It's a big raging river that, you know, has a salmon run and so on. And there's a lot of really interesting Indigenous settler and environmental history to explore by returning to the river scale. So I've started to collect some material for that. I think that's where I may go next, but that I got a lot to plow through first.
Oh man, those all look like really, really awesome projects. I look forward to seeing them as they develop and move forward. But again, thanks a lot for doing this today. It was great to talk to you, great to catch up, and hopefully once this pandemic is over, we'll be able to see each other in person. Like we're about like 35 minutes from each other by car. So
I would love to come out. I would love to come out to Hamilton and see everybody. Michael Egan and I were talking about doing that a couple summers ago, and I was just, I don't know, my kids were just of a smaller age and I was just overwhelmed, but I'm starting to feel a little bit more liberated. So with kids a little older. So yeah, I would dearly love to do that post-pandemic. So maybe next summer. I don't know what we're talking about. But also, yeah, I'd love to chat further about other initiatives, and it was so fun to talk to you, Max. And I try to keep my answers pretty brief and to reduce your editing.
Well, that's Colin and Braden. They're the ones who do the editing. I give them my editorial advice, but as a historian, that doesn't mean anything. So as actual professional editors, they're the ones who decide when is the best time to cut. So, but once again, thanks for coming. This was awesome, and I really hope we get to see each other fairly soon.
Okay, pass along my greetings to people there, but I guess you're just doing that over Zoom anyway, so you might not be seeing anyone.
I mean, these are the greetings to everyone. So.
Yes. Okay. Hi, everybody. Yeah, those were great years, and it was a treat to talk about it again. Thanks, Max.
Awesome. All right, I'll see you later.
Okay. Bye-bye.